Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Basics of Life. My name's Ken Burkey, and just because he just keeps showing up, John Loera is here. How are you, John?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I like your shirt, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's very...
Is that periwinkle or?
Perry. See, now I'm...
Why do I know that color?
Yeah. I'm shade blind. I'm not color blind, but I get... So periwinkle, is that a kind of a blue?
I think so, yeah. Bluish, purplish, something. I don't know. Don't ask me. I just like that word, periwinkle.
Periwinkle, yeah. I like chartreuse. Is that a color?
Magenta.
Magenta.
That's like 80s.
Yeah.
The show is magenta.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Hey, I want to talk about a topic that sounds squishy, but it's actually a discipline, and it's something that around Christmas we sing joy to the world, and one of the fruits of God's Spirit is joy, and nobody would ever say they don't want joy.
Right.
In fact, joy is, C.S. Lewis says it. He says, joy is the serious business of heaven. And that God wants us to have joy. In fact, that's what his prayer, my prayer to his followers, that God, they would be one and that they would experience joy.
Yeah.
And joy is different than happiness, obviously.
Right,
We've talked about that.
Superficial happiness being superficial.
But joy is an attitude.
Yeah.
And it's a discipline, and we lose it sometimes when we get older. I'll tell you a story. One of the most memorable stories, with your kids growing up, you always have these one things. And my son, he's 8 years old, and he's a huge Seattle Mariners fan. Loves Kenny Griffey Jr.
Yeah.
Kenny Griffey Jr. at the time was playing. He wasn't really an A's fan, but they were going to go play at the Oakland Coliseum. So I surprised him, and we went to a night game, and then stayed in a hotel.
Wow.
And then went to the next day game. And so we went to the night game, and I broke the news. We're spending the night, Kenny, and we're going to go to So we got to the hotel. And it's got these double beds, and I'm sitting there, and it's 10:30 at night, and I'm an old guy, and Kenny's jumping from bed to bed, bouncing, and he's just bouncing back and forth, and he's laughing, and he is beyond joyful, just
That's awesome.
The happiest. And I tell Kenny, stop, calm down. He keeps bouncing. He kept going, and I kept saying, calm down. He wouldn't calm down. He's just hyper, and finally he stops, and he looks at me and he says, "Why, Daddy?" And I sat there, and I remember going, "Yeah, why? We have nothing to do. We get to sleep in."
Right.
And so I got on the bed, and we both started bouncing back and forth.
And then they kicked you out of the hotel.
They kicked us out of the hotel. But I realized,
That's
awesome. The joy, and Jesus said the faith of a child and the freedom of a child, and those things as we grow older, we can grow more worrisome or crotchety or just, we can lose our joy.
Yeah, for lots of reasons.
Yeah, for lots of reasons. And so I was just thinking, what a huge goal to say, I want more joy in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, life's short, and it's just easy to lose that. And it's one of God's goals. And I mean, it's Christmas time,
I was over, speaking of that, I was over at the mall trying to find a parking spot a couple days ago, and I'll tell you, there wasn't a lot of joy in the parking lot there. There was almost some fist fights going on.
Yeah.
There. The stress of, and it's like, well, Merry Christmas, joy to the world.
Yeah, it's
goodwill toward men.
Yeah, and exactly. And I was thinking about, really, I'm responsible for my joy.
Right.
No one else. I can't make my wife or my church or my boss be responsible for my joy. It's really my responsibility.
Well, and I guess it's safe to say too. So what you were saying about just having more joy, and we're responsible for it, and the things that we get older, we get cynical, we have worry, whatever. But the understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that joy should stay with us regardless of those things, right? I mean, what we're talking here that's so attractive about joy potentially is it stays with us.
Right.
Even when because we're not going to totally eliminate stress and the realities of life as we get older, but God's promise was more around, this is something that's so much deeper that'll sustain you.
Yeah, there's a couple things. First of all, we are responsible for our joy, and we're responsible every day, because the psalmist says it's a choice. Joy. I choose joy. And so that's why this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice. I will. That's a choice that I make, and that I have control over that. And what's interesting is if you see people who are going through difficult times, or maybe even experiencing loss, that you can see people, they're still choosing joy.
Right.
And that to me is fascinating.
Right.
And then you can see people who have no problems at all.
Yeah, and they're just...
and there's no joy at all. To me, that's fascinating. Now, I don't have a total handle on that.
No.
But to me, that's fascinating. And it's also scary, because how much of my life do I live waiting for joy?
Right.
And so I think that's another thing.
That's a great point.
Yeah, of going, okay, we think of life as I got to do all these things, and then there's joy here, and so eventually I'll get to joy, and you'll never get there. It's really how do I live in that joy in the midst of good times, bad times, all of that.
Well, and that's the thing, and again, not waiting, but it's today, it's in the moment, and that is actually mind-boggling when you think about that, because you do see people that will go, wow, you choose that.
Right.
I think the other side of that is the way you said that makes me think, wow, then I have some I have some power here. I'm not helpless in that.
There you go. Yeah, that's good.
I can actually choose joy.
Right. And nobody can rob me.
And nobody can other than me.
Right. Yeah.
Doesn't mean I'm glad about my circumstances all the time,
No.
but it's how it's a strength.
Yeah. I think there's also there's health. I mean, the faith of a child, children are joyful.
Right.
They're just joyful.
Right.
And they come from a different perspective, and it's what we talked about before on another show is faith. They have this faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so those joy busters in our life is we think we're in control, and we have to figure it all out, and worry hits us, and we compare ourselves to others.
That's a huge one.
And it goes on and on. The list goes on and on. So going back to that faith of a child, to me this is fascinating. I don't have it all worked out yet, but there are some key things that we can do, and part of it is ownership. This ownership, it's just saying no. I can be in tough meetings, I can be criticized, I can whatever, but nobody can steal me of joy.
I think one of the things that's challenging about this too is that we live in a culture that continually bombards us that we need certain things to be joyful. When you talked about comparing, and we get caught up in this culture that says, it's just marketing and advertising, and says you won't be joyful, you need these things, or this status is what's going to make you joyful, and that's a slippery slope. More than that, it's a black hole.
Right.
That steals our joy every single day. I think it's interesting, because I find myself, not even going through tough circumstances finding joy, but I can lose my joy just when I start getting on this, man, I want this, and why don't I have that, or that person has that,
Yeah.
But we fight that every day in our culture that goes, man, I can't turn on the TV without being drawn to that kind of thinking.
Right. Yeah. No, it's and so it's a discipline, and it's a daily choice.
Right.
And so there's some disciplines that I think are just so obvious, but I'm going to choose these disciplines because I see the fruit of it, and I've seen the fruit of it in my life, and I've obviously seen the fruit of it in other people's lives. Not in any particular order, but you got to. And we sound redundant on this show, but you got to hang around joyful people.
Right.
Now, because inevitably we all know joy suckers. We have enough
of those.
We have enough joy suckers in our lives.
I've been meaning to talk to you about that.
Yeah. I'm that anchor. And sometimes you won't be able to avoid those joys. If your boss is a joy sucker, you have a couple of choices. You can quit if it's bad enough, but you're going to have to deal with that. So you have to be around people who are joyful, because joy is contagious, but so is negativity. Joy sucking.
Yeah. Well, that's true, because I think about people in my life that it's fun to be around joyful people. Yeah. It is contagious. Yeah. It does wear off.
Right. Stephen Kelly Stockwell. You know them very well.
Yeah.
They work with the homeless.
Yeah.
They've sacrificed a lot in their life. Really, this is another point of this, but they're some of the most joyful people.
Yeah.
And yet, from the world standpoint,
Right.
it's like, well, they're not rich, they're not this, they're not that. Well, but they're joyful, and you just love being around people like that. Because again, this isn't in any certain order. Let me carry that thought to another. It seems like the most joyful people are people who have a purpose beyond just themselves and being comfortable.
Right.
Like I said before,
That's
people
for sure.
who are serving and are going into difficult places. The paradox there is they're joyful many times, where somebody who has created their own kingdom and their own comfort world, there's no joy at all. In fact, there's an emptiness to that.
Well, and that rings so true, because you talk about paradoxes, and one of thought is the more that we get, we often the more that we want.
Yeah.
And so people who are self-focused or acquire, gain, it's about what I have.
Yeah.
That it goes back to that black hole thing that
Yeah.
says the paradox is it's never enough.
Right.
It's interesting that somebody like the Stockwells, or people who have purpose and found that in that purpose it's about, really is, as much as a cliche, it's that it sounds like a cliche, to give is better to give than receive.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden you go, it is, because you have more joy.
Yeah. And those are the kind of people you want to hang around.
Yeah.
I think of Bruce Latcher, who, again, God totally changed his heart towards the homeless. And when you eat with Bruce, who's spending nights and sleepless nights and helping the homeless, especially with the winter, and yet, how you doing, bro? I'm great. He's just there's this joy. You almost want to just lean against them. There's this joy
touch him a little bit?
infusion. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's a really great point too, going back to the discipline, because for us to be disciplined daily to choose joy, we need influence in our lives.
Yeah.
And when we're around joyful people, it's easier to be disciplined to choose joy.
Yeah.
When we're around joy suckers, it's easy to go, I'm off track.
Yeah.
I'm not going to choose this.
And again, this is generally speaking, joy suckers tend to be consumers.
Yeah.
And joy givers tend to be not, givers. They give, they're giving of their lives. I told you this before we started the show, but that Berkeley did this thing where they put amoebas in perfect conditions. There was no stress, because sometimes we think, well, how can you be joyful when you're doing difficult things? They put these amoebas in perfect temperature, protein, everything, perfect conditions, no stress, and they all died.
Wow.
And it's because we were created. Now we can be overstressed, obviously.
Sure,
we can have too many things going on. But our culture really teaches us, that comfort. But it's in the midst of the battle of doing what God asks us to do, to serve and to bring hope, that there's joy because there's a purpose. I mean, the biggest selling book of the last century was
the
Purpose-Driven Life. Why? Because we need a purpose.
And interestingly enough, those first lines, right? It's not about you.
It's not about you. That's right.
Go figure,
Yeah.
and just what you're saying. And that's the other thing too, is interesting that, when you're talking about stresses and things that come up in our lives that actually bring us more joy, I think it also, from kind of the human psyche, it gives us perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That you actually start to appreciate the things that you would normally not appreciate.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Just because of time, a couple other thoughts, and this one's an obvious one, but this is a discipline, and that's Henry Nouwen. He says that gratitude leads to joy, and many times we get it reversed. Well, when I feel joyful, then I'll be grateful.
Right.
And so it's really the
That's a
discipline
great
of gratitude, and gratitude's powerful because gratitude is not denying that there's difficult things in your life.
Right.
But it's a perspective thing, because when you begin to write down all the things that you are thankful for, it puts those challenges in perspective. But it also, the fruit of it's joy.
Right.
Right. So gratitude is a huge discipline.
I love that, because that really just ties to this whole sitting down, and you've talked about this before, where you go, I'm just going to write down or go through and take inventory of things I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
It's easy, in life, again, we go back to this, it's easy to get this list going of what we don't like or what we're not grateful for.
And you're blowing by all the stuff that's blessed, you're blessed with.
And those are so connected.
Yeah.
And I love that. Hey, I'm glad for my health or my family or my, a job or,
It's Abraham Lincoln or whoever, he gets credit for saying it, but some people complain about the thorns on a rose, or some people celebrate the rose. Well, I don't know how
the flower.
The flower.
Yes.
I just botched that up. I apologize.
I think it comes down to some people focus on the
thorns and some people focus on the flower. There you go. That's what I was saying.
But it is true, though.
It is. And gratitude is, again, we could do a whole show on that. I want to conclude, though, with ultimately, because, I really got this thought of joy, because joy to the world, and Jesus came to give joy to all people. It's available to all people, but because Jesus isn't about religion. Religion is for some people. It's for this group of people. It's for this country. It's for this belief. Jesus, his joy is for all people.
Yeah.
And it's about that relationship. And that relationship, it's that perspective that joy is that it's an eternal perspective.
Yeah, it is.
Temporary perspective, if this is all there is, there's not going to be a lot of joy.
No.
But that eternal perspective is, let me tell you, I'll tell you the short version of the story, but there was a true story, girl getting married, and she had the mother-in-law, the mother of the bride, it was the mother of the bridezilla. She was the mother of the bride. Just, I don't have the time to go into all the details, but just everything. The poor pastor who tells this story, the mother of the bride met with him more than the bride and the groom met with him. She had everything down to everything's perfectly planned, everything. They had this orchestra. It was just detailed, just to a nauseating. So everybody's down there, they're all ready to go. The mother of the bride walks down all proudly. Well, everything took so long because of all the details. The bride was nervous in the back, and she was eating stuff off the hors d'oeuvre table. And so she's eating nervously, and then you can see what's coming is her adrenaline, it crashed. She had like shellfish in her stomach anyway, she walks down the aisle and just pukes everywhere, just pukes. And just the whole place, and everything this mother-in-law planned, it was just horrific. I tell you that to say this, what happened is everybody left, and the groom picks her up, and about half an hour later they get married, just them, and nothing like the mother-in-law planned. It was the most careful kiss ever from a groom to a bride. But the point is, what was funny is 10 years later, perspective had changed, and they had a 10-year anniversary, and they invited everybody back who was invited to the wedding, and they actually showed the video of that. And I guess the whole point there is at the end of the day, the bride and the groom got the bride. And that's what really matters. Right. All that other stuff. And that's the promise of Scripture at the end of the day. At the end of the day, that we get Jesus forever, and that there will be a day where there's no more tears and no more sorrow and no more pain. And so the groom does get the bride, and that this marriage, it's an eternal thing. And that's where our joy comes from. It's a sustaining joy.
Right.
It's not a temporary
not
thing.
The circumstances maybe that are in front of us. I also like going back to the discipline and the choice. When you were talking about, that's with Christmas and joy to, Jesus coming and this relationship and joy. And, it all comes down to the same thing too, of it being a choice of ours. Yeah. We choose that.
Yeah.
God's not shoving that down our throat. He's,
Yeah.
It's a choice we have to make.
Yeah, it is a choice, and that choice of that eternal choice. Am I going to live with an eternal perspective? Because again, like that wedding, a lot of things can go wrong. Right. We can have well-laid plans like that mother-in-law did, but at the end of the day, life can puke on you.
But it didn't take away from the ultimate result.
They still got married.
Yeah.
And that's what that all was about. And at the end of the day,
I like that.
At the end of the day, that's what Jesus wants, a relationship.
Yeah.
And that's a promise to all people. But again,
that's why he came,
Yeah. So going back to it, I guess for the practical side, going forward in your family, in your life, choose joy.
Choose joy.
The opposite is choose. It's not good. It's
and surround yourself with joyful people.
Yeah. Practice gratitude.
Manage the joy suckers.
Yeah.
You know, practice gratitude is huge. And the other thing, daily.
Daily.
I think that's what I took too from this is just this is a daily thing.
Yeah. And get a bigger purpose in your life than just you.
Yeah.
And you know, again, it's all in that last point, that eternal. We all have this God-shaped hole.
Yep.
And so, you know, until we settle that one, we'll always be kind of restless. So
that's good stuff.
that's it.
I feel more joyful just after
Good.
this show.
Good.
It's good. It makes you think.
As soon as the show's over, I gotta let John know he's a joy sucker in my life. So
Didn't want to do that on air.
Yeah, no, that'd be rude.
Thank you.
Thanks,
You
man.
just did.
Thanks. Yeah. Hey, thanks for being with us here on the Basics of Life, and hope things are going well. And we'll see you next time.